I sort of decided I was going to make a few more videos. I've been absent for a while doing it. And while I've been absent, I've been looking at society in general. And some of the things that I've come to conclusion is people don't really know what's going on around them. And they've been struggling for some certainty in their life. So, and this is not just something that's to an individual, it's to everybody in all sorts of cultural organizations like politicians and sports, other things. I think the best answer for people that are searching for the truth is to understand that the truth is inside yourself as you. Swami Muktananda said, I salute the God inside you. And so there's a great deal to learn about yourself. And in a way, this video is designed for people that have had some spiritual practices, some spiritual realizations. And hopefully this will help to, this talk will help to cut through the clutter. One of the things in spiritual circles that you don't hear a lot about here in the West is something called the lineage. And what is the lineage? It is a group of people that have gone down a particular path. And they've managed to gather information about their own state and pass it on to other people. So there is actually the ability to tune into that lineage and advance faster on the way to realization. If I were to ask you, are you realized? And many of you would say, no, I'm not realized yet. I'm on the way. Or some people will actually say, oh, I'm realized. So one of the things that I would like to do is to inform you about the state of realization that's always inside you. So kind of what I'd like to do is introduce you to my lineage. This is a picture of Swami Satsananda. He was sitting on a little platform that was up in Rishikesh, on the next to the Ganges River. his guru was somebody named Swami Shivananda, also a publisher of books. This has his name, Swami Shivananda, and he was the guru of Satchidananda. But the editor of Shivananda's books was a guy named Swami Venkateshananda. He transcribed and condensed, edited a book called Vasishtha's Yoga. So he was the brother monk of Swami Satchidananda. So why am I telling you about this lineage, and what does it have to do with realization for yourself? Okay. A very famous guru named Ramakrishna said that there is no end to self-realization. The Muktananda used to say, the God dwells in you as you. So what is this? So let's talk about what that means for you in looking for spiritual teachers. Well, one conclusion is, how often do these so-called gurus tell you that they come from a lineage? And that they are somehow empowered by being associated with those. Not many people know that, for instance, Deepak Chopra, who's very famous in the West, not many people know that his guru was Mahesh Yogi. He was actually his doctor, and he was actually his doctor when Mahesh Yogi was poisoned. So one of the things that you can use this bit of information is, and when you're going out and you're checking out these different gurus, do they refer back to the guru? To show that they have an understanding of what the guru had as an understanding. Swami Satchidananda learned a very important lesson from Shivananda. One of the things, Shivananda had an ashram in Rishikesh. And when Satchidananda came along, Shivananda recognized the value of him and what he could do for the Divine Life Society. And so he gave him a little hut just right next to the temple. And Satchidananda was so happy to be there. Of course, he was always very meticulous in his surroundings. So one of the things that he took to doing was sweeping out his dirt floor, collecting the dirt that he swept up, took it outside the hut, went to the little fence that surrounded it, and dumped the dirt on the other side. So one day Shivananda was on his way to the temple and he saw this going on, and he didn't say anything. What he did do is the next day he had some sweet meats, a type of sugary treat that he had made up, and inside each of the treats he put a very hot chili pepper. So the next morning when he was having a satsang in the temple, he asked Satchidananda to come up, and he had a gift for him. His name then he was not named Satchidananda, he was named Yogiraj, which means the king of the yogis. So Satchidananda came up, he held out his hand, and Shivananda put one of the sweetmeats with the very hot chilies in it, and he gave it to him. And so Satchidananda, the tradition was you just eat it without questioning it. So he did. And of course the chili started doing its work, and in about a minute or so he was getting up and hopping around in the hall, and Shivananda was laughing and saying, "Oh, look at Yogi Raj, the master of equanimity," and laughing out loud. What did this have to do with the sweeping out the floor? Well, that was a sign of egotism, and that his place was special, i.e., he was special. Yogi Raj, the king of the yogis, is special. So he wanted to have Satchidananda understand that was a defect in his thinking. Okay, so that's the story, and I'm talking about the lineage. Okay, so this is something that you have to think about, and so that is one of the, how would you say it? A compendium of the lineage's knowledge that you can tap into it. It does this on the physical plane, but it also does it on the esoteric plane. And since I cannot demonstrate to you on the esoteric plane as easily the physical, I told you the physical story. So I wanted to just to summarize this section. If you are seeking somebody to teach you, you really want to have somebody that can take you from where you are to the end of realization. I'll just mention this book here. Okay, so this book, Swami Satchidananda did not write this book. This is really a commentary of a 5,000-year-old textbook. This Patanjali's Yoga Sutras predates the invention of writing. So the way that people understood this book in its entirety is that they had to memorize. And it has 200 sentences, where they call them sutras. And each one of those sutras has some direct bearing to your spiritual advancement. Okay, so the first chapter is divided into 4 chapters. The first chapter is telling you why you want to study yoga. Okay, so the first sentence, the first sutra says, here begins the exposition on yoga. So the first chapter is all about what the benefits are, but over the course of time, commentaries have to be made to fit Yoga Sutras into the modern era. Okay. Okay. The second chapter talks about the 8 major steps or procedures that you can do to become an expert at yoga. The end of the second chapter touches briefly on something called Samadhi. Now, Samadhi is a special state that is accomplished by a type of meditation of some sort. There's a lot of different things that can be considered a version of Samadhi, even if it's not in the Hindu tradition. For instance, just to show you how prevalent Samadhi is in this culture is, you've seen a couple of books called Being in the Zone. This is a sports phrase, and what this means is that if you're playing really well, all of a sudden you go into a state where you're just doing. And one of the things that so this is in every sport, baseball, football, soccer, there's always that state of being in the zone. Sometimes it's accompanied by physical effects. But they all talk about how much they enjoy being in that state. And that state is an instance of Samadhi. Now, the yogis have studied this very extensively. And what they say about it is that this is something that they really want. But being in the zone is being a version of a short state of Samadhi. Isn't really yet laid out in the Yoga Sutras. One of the things that they talk about in the third chapter is how you can create a superpower. So everybody gets excited about the Samadhi and the superpowers. And you will hear people say, oh, well, it's not necessary to have Samadhi and to have the superpowers. That's just not significant. Well, just to give you some idea, 1/3 of the book of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is about samadhi, how to acquire it, and how to acquire a samadhi, a city of using samadhi. I'm sorry. So there's the first thing that you can do is to learn to know what the past and the future is. Along the way, in doing these practices to acquire the cities, what you come to find out is that you as a spiritual being, while you're experiencing a human life, you also have other parts of yourself that is manifesting. So that these cities, which a rough translation is an accomplishment, tell you that yes, you are more than physical. All of the cities that they talk about in the 3rd chapter are about doing something to your reality that you cannot taste, touch, or see. There's no way that you, as a physical being, could accomplish what the city is. Okay, so like Sutra 45 in the 3rd chapter tells you how to walk on water. And actually, there's records showing how Jesus, when he was in Kashmir, actually acquired that city. So anyway, this is another way to validate whether somebody really has the real goods. First of all, can they get you into the state of samadhi? One of the statements they will make is saying, I will give you samadhi. No, that's not true. You already have the state of samadhi inside you in the subconscious. So if I'm going to give it to you, it has to be something outside of yourself that they're going to give you. So if you have it already, they can't give it to you. That's one of the tests you should have for people that are spiritual teachers. Secondly, they have to be able to demonstrate that they have the mastery of a city. You should question them and be able to have them demonstrate it for you, right? Well, there's all sorts of things that they do to say that they can't do it. And if they could tell you, what they would tell you is, this is something that has to be learned. And so, to give you an analogy, learning a city is like learning to become a doctor. Okay? So when you go to medical school, the first year you learn a little bit about the body and some of the procedures, like to sew up a wound, to make sure an infection's not there, different things like that. But you don't learn brain surgery. So it's a matter of acquiring the knowledge about a city so that the practice of a city is just like the practice of being a doctor. You're still learning all the time. They never mention that, do they? Another conclusion from the third chapter is that it's only the third chapter. There is something called the fourth chapter. The name of that chapter is called Absoluteness. And so there's not a things that are absolute, is there? Well, a good example of planetary objects, the absolute planetary object in our solar system is the sun. There's nothing bigger. There's nothing that goes beyond that. That's an example of absolute. So what does absoluteness mean? Well, it means that you can control not just things around you by the cities, but it promises you that you can learn to control and create an entire universe. That's a pretty big claim. So some of the things that it talks about in the fourth chapter is how to create minds. So an example of a created being in some way, shape, or form is a robot. Software, algorithms, those could all be seen as a created mind. So I don't want to say too much about the created mind because most people don't have the background even to understand what that is. But what I do want to say is the fourth chapter is about teaching you how to be happy no matter what. Okay, so this is one of the statements about Tantra, which means, one way of defining it is how to create the reality around you. And so is this something that you can do not only in this lifetime, in this reality, but then you would be able to create another reality. So this is a pretty big claim. You know, my thing is that you need to validate everything. So I have been subjected to people saying, well, what is your superpower? And how do you manifest that? And I can have you talk to people that can tell you how that happens. This idea of Tantra, make yourself happy right now, in the present moment, in the here and now, is the end goal of enlightenment. And that it's accessible to you at every moment. It doesn't matter what you think. It only matters what you do. So one of the examples that I use is this is the analogy. You're walking along the street and there's a kid playing in the yard with his ball, and somehow the ball gets kicked out onto the street. The kid runs, not looking at all, runs out onto the street after his ball. You see a car coming down the street, and you instantly calculate, oh, I can go out and get that kid and we'll both be safe. So what do you immediately do is go out onto the street, grab the kid, and bring him back with the ball. And then you tell him, well, no, you got to watch what you're doing. Okay, so from the Chinese definition of enlightenment, they were enlightened the moment they made the decision to go out and get the kid. Okay? They were enlightened when they got the kid. They were enlightened what the telling the kid no, you shouldn't do that. So this is everything that you're doing is exactly what an enlightened being would do. So from that criteria, you're enlightened the moment you made the decision to go out and get that kid. Now, it doesn't last forever because people go back and you talk to them later and they'll say, well, I don't feel as good as I did as when I got that kid back on the street, off the street. That's one conclusion. That the state of enlightenment is open to you at every moment. It's not about the cities. It's not about Samadhi. It's about being in that state 24/7. To have that feeling, to make it stronger and longer, okay? And eventually it goes into what's called the Turiya state. Turiya in Sanskrit means four. First state is deep sleep. Second state is dreaming state. Third state is consciousness, being conscious in this reality. So the Turiya state is the state that exists in all those other states. Can be learned. And that's the real enlightenment. That's who you are. That being that exhibits those actions. So that concludes what my thing is today. Thank you for coming, and thank you for taking the time to listen.